Hello, listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. I'm your speaker, Casey, and today we have new territory to bring to you all. Before we start, however, I wanted to remind you all of the excellent opportunity that I have been offered to attend Podcast Row at the 2022 CrimeCon in London. The event takes place over 2 days in June, and my podcast is being featured amongst some incredible shows. If you would like to come and take part and come and spend some time with me, you can use the code CULTLIVE to receive 10% off ticket prices today. Just go to crimecon.co.uk and use the code CULTLIVE at the checkout to receive 10% off, or you can click the link in the episode description. Also, a big thank you to Jess and Leanne, two current patrons of the show that have increased their pledges this week. I'm so humbled by your support, and on top of this, I need to introduce my two new patrons, Ashley and the wonderful Spencer. With these two new pledges, I can't believe that I'm saying I am almost halfway to reaching the first Patreon goal. Thank you so much for both being here. I hope you enjoy the exclusive content, the goodies now on the way to you all that I have posted today, and you can also enjoy a 15% off code for CrimeCon 2022. Also, I've added the new names to the sponsor section of my website, and I really appreciate your support so much. Now, let's get on to the episode. Today I chat with Jordan, who brings us the podcast's first official look at a sect of evangelism, with some parts sounding familiar and others sounding outright peculiar. I hope you enjoy this chat as much as I did. Here is Jordan. So hello, Jordan, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to share your story with us today. This, again, is new territory for me, so I am really looking forward to learning a bit more. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
My name's Jordan. Yeah, I was a part of the German Baptist Brethren Church, and there's more names for it, but I can get into that a little bit later. So I've got a wife, got 2 kids, 1 dog, and a lot of religious trauma. And I work in IT, so very technical, which, as you'll hear, part of my story and how I grew up, technical stuff is not encouraged or what have you in the group. So it's kind of an odd career path, I would say, from my upbringing. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Perhaps it's your inner rebellion coming forward and taking a stand on some of the things that you were told to stay away from.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more where that came from, for sure.
This, as I mentioned at the start, it's not a group that I've come across, not by the name German Baptist Brethren, but perhaps by maybe some of the other names. So can you tell us what those other names are, and maybe 1 or 2 of them might be a bit more familiar to people?
Yeah, it's kind of confusing because when you hear the word Baptist, you think, like, if you're from America and kind of the Bible Belt in the South, like Southern Baptists or the American Baptist Convention and stuff like that. This group is not related to the traditional American Baptists in that sense.
Right.
The name Baptist just came from the idea that they baptized again after infant baptism, and that's why they're called Anabaptists, if that term is more familiar for people. The official name of the movement I grew up in is called the Old German Baptist Brethren Church. They've split several times over the years, but the most recent major split was in 2009, and the more progressive movement, and I say progressive lightly because I mean very, very conservative, but the more progressive movement called themselves New Conference. So you have the Old German Baptist Brethren Church, Old Conference, and New Conference. And then actually just recently, within the past year, the Old Conference has split again. And so I'm not sure what those names are, but it is a part of the Brethren, the Church of the Brethren, sort of, but they definitely are on their own. They're a lot closer to Mennonites or Hutterites or things like that. if you can picture something in your mind, picture Amish, minus the horse and buggies. So German Baptists do drive cars, they do have phones, they have electricity, but they look very similar to Amish, like old order Amish, where with the women wear dresses, head bonnets. The men have beards with no mustaches, black hats, that very old traditional style of dress.
If I was to walk around and see some members of this particular faith, I might get confused with the Amish community.
Yes, yeah, and that happened a lot growing up. We'd be in a store with my mom or my grandma, and it's a lot easier to tell the women apart from the men because the women they stand out a lot more in public. But we would get asked, like, are you guys nuns or are you Amish? Like, people just don't know. But yeah, you would definitely turn your head if you were not from an area where plain dressed people exist. So Pennsylvania, it wouldn't turn as many heads because there's a lot of Amish there.
Was this an area, would you say this is an area that had a lot of Amish movement inside of it, or was it kind of interesting for people to come across members of your church and kind of not be able to differentiate your faith-based movement to people involved in the Amish community?
Well, from where we're from, there are no Amish. I'm on the west side of the United States. Amish are typically mainly around Pennsylvania, Indiana, those areas. But the Anabaptist groups like Brethren and Hutterites and Mennonites and Old Order German Baptists and all this, they typically stay in a rural area, and they don't try and assimilate into town life, I guess. The Amish call it the English. That's what they call non-Amish people. We don't really have a word. We didn't have a word like that. It's just those are city people, and we live in the country, and we're our own group. And so you could live in a town that had German Baptist in it and not see them ever, probably, because they just don't participate in activities that go on in town.
Right. I see. The Old German Baptist Brethren Church, is that right?
Old German Baptist Brethren Church, correct, yes.
Is this a movement that you were born into, something your parents were already involved in, or is it something you found as you were growing up?
So the Anabaptist movement came out of like the 1500s, and then out of that, the Mennonites followed a guy named Menno Simons that came out of that. Ours was out of a guy by the name of Alexander Mack, I think in like the early 1700s, maybe late 1600s. I'm not exactly sure on that. So it's been around for a while. At some point, it came over to America. And I can trace my last name from my father's side all the way to like the 1500s, early 1500s in Germany. And I know all the names and which one of my ancestors came over to America to be with the church. So I can trace my family's lineage before German Baptist, and then like in the 17 or early 1800s when one of my ancestors came to Ohio, I believe, and came over with the church or to join the church or be a part of it. So basically my dad's side has been in it since, 250 years to 300 years, 1800. So that's 200 and some years. Yeah. So it's very, very ingrained into our family. My mom, though, she did not grow up religious. She met my dad in high school and converted, I guess. She, to become a member, you have to get baptized, and I'll talk a bit more about that process because it is very in-depth. But she joined when she was like 17, I think, so that she could date my dad, I guess. And then they got married when she was 18, and I think she was always kind of an outsider because of that.
Right.
They do accept you, but still, it's like kind of an outsider. You have to kind of give up everything and join. And the more I talk about this, the more I'm like, it really seems like a cult, because you kind of give up your identity to join, if you will. And if you came from the outside, you're sort of viewed as an outsider. I don't want to say she was always an outcast, but
well, sometimes we talk about like second, third, fourth generation. I don't even know if you would know what that would make you in terms of how far back your lineage and family involvement goes in this movement, kind of what generation that would make you being born into this faith.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say like sixth or seventh. My uncle is really into our family history and all that, because not many people can trace their last name to a town in Germany that either was named after us or we were named after the town. I'm not exactly sure, because it gets a little murky way back in the 1500s, but I don't have that timeline in front of me, so I couldn't count, but I do know it's
a good few generations in.
Yes.
So your mum joins the church at 17. She is, I don't know if converted is the right word, because she's not changing from a different faith-based group. Perhaps she's changing from agnostic or atheist. Converted at 17, joins the church, marries your father at aged 18, and then they have you. Are you an only child, or do you have brothers and sisters?
No, I have 4 siblings. My oldest sister, so I'm the second. My older sister was a baptized member. None of the rest of my siblings joined officially. I mean, you're kind of a part of it, but you're not an actual like voting member or whatever.
Okay.
Until you get baptized. That is the joining, I guess. She left right around the split, I think 2008 or 2009, right before the split. And I followed her out because I was looking for a ticket out of there. But none of the rest of my siblings ended up joining.
You've talked a little bit about sort of how this group was founded and a little bit about its history. I don't know if there's anything that you think is prevalent to mention in terms of the backstory of this particular church before we move on to your story specifically.
Yes, there's a few things that I think will help guide or make sense of some stories I tell later on. So since the German Baptists' origins are tied in with the Anabaptist movement, which is a much larger movement, it helps to know why the Anabaptists broke away from what they broke away from. So back in the 1500s, they broke away from the Church of England, or Catholic Church, I think Church of England specifically, because they rejected specifically infant baptism. They did not believe that was the way to salvation, because an infant can't make a choice. And so they would rebaptize themselves as adults when they made a choice to follow Christ or something like that. And so they were, at some point, they got nicknamed disparagingly as Dunkers or Dunkards, or like in the old German, it would be like Tunkers, I think, with a T. And that nickname stuck. They adopted it, kind of like other groups have done. Like, queer was a derogatory term until it just got adopted by those people as like, well, you're going to call us that, we're just going to embrace it. And so that was sort of what they did. You're going to make fun of us as dunkers? Well, we dunk, so fine, we're sticking with it. In 1708, I mentioned Alexander Mack. He started the Schwarzenow Brethren, which was like, I think, a town in Germany where they all agreed to join up and start a new movement. And somewhere out of that, the German Baptists came out of that. They, I think a bigger part of why they wanted to start their own movement was it was a pacifistic thing. There was a lot of fighting and torture and stake burning between the Catholics and the Protestants. And they rejected that because that was not what, Christ taught in the New Testament. They wanted to do away with all the violence associated with it. I know I've heard stories where, these Anabaptist pastors or preachers or leaders would get their tongues cut out so they couldn't preach. That's part of why they, moved to America as well, to get away from the persecution, because the Church of England did not want this movement happening. So there's a lot of very interesting history if any of the listeners really like church history and, how movements start and move around. But the biggest thing is baptism as an adult and pacifism. And those are key parts to who the German Baptists are. And also not having, the King of England being the head of the Church of England or the Pope being the head of the Catholic Church. They reject a leader like that specifically. One face to the movement that you worship or hold in higher regard. And sometimes I think because of that, I have a hard time saying, oh, it was a cult. There's no leader that you have to listen to. There's no person you can point at that's calling the shots. Obviously that's a more common version of what cults are. This organization has a lot of the other characteristics of a cult or high demand religion.
Now we know a little bit of the church's history. What was it like at the point where you were growing up in the church? What did it look like in terms of daily commitments to church-related activities? Were you expected to kind of just go once a week? Did you practice any sort of prayer before dinner or bed, or what did it look like in terms of commitments to church activities?
We had a weekly service every Sunday, as most Christian groups do. There would be maybe like once a month, they would get together for what they call a singing. And so there's no musical instruments at all. It's all a cappella. And so they would gather in a shop or a barn somewhere, never at the church, interestingly enough. It was always at somebody's shop, but you just bring your hymnal and sing for several hours, and usually there'd be food or desserts or something like that. It's just kind of like a worship night, if you will. Outside of the once a year communion time, which I will go into a little bit more because it's quite involved, there typically wasn't a lot expected of you. There would be what's called an annual meeting, which is usually typically on the East Coast or Midwest, where all of the groups from all over the U.S. would get together and vote on things and make policy, but you weren't expected there. So those were just some of the more organized things that you're expected to be a part of, but I wouldn't say it was over the top.
So you've got 2 commitments a week, sort of, one in the church, one somewhere random, where these faith-based activities take place, and then the kind of throughout the year there's 1 or 2 different events that are peppered throughout that you kind of have the choice on whether to attend or not. So it's not too demanding in that sense of kind of all of your spare time in the week is taken up by church-related activities. But you've mentioned that there's a few things intrinsic to the movement that are high demanding in terms of the baptism and the communion and a few things that you've mentioned as we've gone through. So what did it look like for your mum when she was baptized? Was it the same for her as it was for when you were baptized, or was it different? Did it change in between?
I never got baptized. So, the age where you're expected to kind of make a choice would be between 13 to 18. And I left when I was 15. I don't know what others' expectations were for me. I didn't care. I wanted to get out, and I couldn't until my sister left. But, for my mom, what it looks like when somebody's going to join and get baptized is I mean, they have to know you and your character and who you are beforehand. So you couldn't just walk off the street and say, hey, I like this. I want to get baptized. That wouldn't go, because when you voice your interest in getting baptized and joining, I mean, they're one and the same. You get baptized and you join the German Baptist Church as a member.
Okay, yeah.
It's the same thing. You could not join as a member without getting baptized. Meaning, if I had been baptized and I was at a different church, and then I said, okay, I want to be a German Baptist, but I've been baptized, they would make me get re-baptized by a German Baptist minister.
Okay. And once you are baptized, does it make it significantly harder to leave the movement, do you think?
Yeah, yes, it would. So in order to get baptized, part of like the vetting process is, if you will, is some elders or deacons or kind of a mix of the two would go to your house and talk to you and kind of talk about some of the verses that mention baptism, what it is, and, make sure, are you good? Or do you agree with the church's stance on things? Just kind of the double checking. And then on one Sunday, they'll set a date and everyone knows it. They'll cut the church service a little bit short and ask the family and of the person getting baptized and the baptized person to leave the building, and then the head elder will take a vote. Or it's not really a vote; it's more of a, does anyone have any reason why, so and so should not be a member of the church and get baptized? And then they'll go down, and the elder points at every member in the pews, and it's either, should they be received as a member, and you nod your head, or should they not be a member, and you shake your head. I've never seen anybody not become a member during these votes. That would be really awkward. But after the vote, they bring them back in. Okay, everyone said, there's no reason why you shouldn't become a member, and then they'll talk to them for a little bit longer about it, and then everybody drives to a specific spot at a river we have here locally. And so the elder and the baptizee will walk out, and they ask 3 questions. Do you agree to renounce Satan and all of his pernicious ways? Do you vow to uphold the principles of nonviolence, non-swearing, and non-conformity? Nonviolence is the pacifism. So no defending yourself if you're getting robbed, no going to war, which I'll talk a little bit more about. No, none of it. You're not going to strike anybody because Jesus was pacifistic. And then nonconformity means you don't look like those in the world, those who are not saved. So you dress like us, you talk like us, you act like us. You do not act like the other Christians, the other worldly people. And then there was one other thing I'm kind of forgetting. They asked 3 specific questions. You say yes, and then they baptize you. They dunk you 3 times in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And then you're a member. And this is where people are going to be like, okay, this is weird, because the German Baptists take the New Testament extremely literally. And so that's the head coverings. That's how you do communion. That's how you treat other members of the church. You don't sue anybody. They do not go to court at all for any reason whatsoever. So part of that is greeting one another with the holy kiss. So members of the German Baptist Church will, when they greet each other, kiss on the lips, same sex. And it's not like a big weird thing. I mean, usually just like a quick peck, but I just grew up as normal, watching, people at the church greet each other. Hey, Bob, how's it going? Pretty good. Sam, and shake hands and kiss on the lips. Same for the women. So this new member, as they come out of the water, everyone starts singing a hymn, and one by one, the members of the church go through and greet the new member. If, let's say it was a man getting baptized, the women would give a hug or shake hands, usually shake hands, and the men would greet with a kiss. And you greet every member of the church as a new member with the holy kiss.
I thought that you meant that everybody got kissed on the lips. I didn't realize that you meant it was it was restricted only to
Yes,
same-sex kisses.
Mm-hmm.
So that is so interesting. So if I got
it's
baptized,
peculiar for sure.
It is. I've never heard of anything like that before. If I got baptized today, all the women in the room would then kiss me on the lips, but the men would just shake my hand.
Correct.
That is so strange.
I've heard of other groups where they will greet like intersex, like with a kiss. So it's like men will kiss women. Those are maybe just rumors some kids at church, were spreading to be dumb. I don't know. I can't verify that, but
there's so many things here. So first of all, that kind of reminds me of a part of one of the Nexium documentaries when you see like Keith Raniere just kissing everybody. Like that's what initially popped into my mind. But then I'm also thinking, what if you grew up in this community and it was very, very insular, so that when you stepped out and tried to kind of pave your own way, like just walk... What if you were just like, thanks for my coffee, and then tried to like give that person a kiss? Like, because that's like what you grew up thinking was like normal. Do you know what I mean? Like, to a sticky situation if that's how they thought, that you greet people. And
there's enough, going to town and seeing other people and all that, and knowing family members who've left and stuff, that I think most people recognize when and where greeting with a kiss is appropriate and not.
Mm-hmm. And some listeners are probably thinking, well, they do it in France, they do it in other countries. It's customary to meet somebody and give them a kiss on the cheek or whatever, but it's just very specific that it's same-sex kisses on the lips. And I wonder then that leads me on to the question of what is the church's stance on the LGBTQIA plus community? Is it aligned with the kind of acceptance of that community, or is it just a strange custom that's come from the doctrine, as you mentioned, the kind of literal interpretation of the New Testament?
Yeah, I mean, LGBTQ members would not be accepted whatsoever. That's a grave sin. It's very clear in the Old and New Testament, if you read it literally, that it's a sin. Marriage is between one man and one woman. Part of taking the Old or the New Testament, or all of it, I guess, literally, is when it says greet each other with a holy kiss, you greet each other with a holy kiss. And when it says, you can't be gay, then you can't be gay. And when it says you cannot get divorced and remarried, they're probably just as strict and hardlined about divorce and remarriage as they would be about homosexual relationships, which is typically odd for, let's say, like American evangelical, conservative style churches, because conservative evangelicalism is very different. It's very rooted in nationalism, like American nationalism, and all sorts of crazy stuff there. German Baptists are not political at all. You will never hear them advocating for a political party. They don't vote at all. No voting. I don't think my dad, he's left the group since then, and he still has never voted, as far as I know. So very, very divorced from politics. Like, nope, not doing it, because our kingdom is not of this world. Like, we belong to, we're heirs with Christ, and we do not belong on earth. We belong, in heaven with Christ. So we're not going to vote. We're not going to run for office. We're not going to hold office. We don't care. We don't even participate in war. So during World War II, when people were getting drafted, they had a very special agreement with the government because of their religious beliefs that they were drafted as what's called conscientious objectors, COs. And so, they would go maybe cook or make tents or do something nonviolent. And actually there was a movie about, I think, a Seventh-day Adventist. Andrew Garfield played the army guy, but he wouldn't pick up a rifle and fight. He saved a bunch of guys, and it's all a true story, but he was a pacifist. He would not fight.
Yeah, was it called Hacksaw Ridge or something?
Yeah, yep. Hacksaw Ridge.
I saw that movie. I thought it was actually quite moving.
Yes. Yeah, and the pacifism, the nonviolence, I really appreciate. When I was initially leaving the group, I thought, it's cowardly. Like if somebody's trying to come in and steal stuff or kill my wife and kids, like I'm gonna defend myself. But so there's, I guess, everyone can be how they want, but I do appreciate looking now at conservative evangelicalism as I'm leaving that. The idea that war is bad. We don't, we should not go be bombing other countries. We don't need to participate in the taking of other human life. And so I can appreciate the pacifism. And there is a thing called neo-Anabaptists now, which is like a newish movement where they don't have all the old order stuff, but they do like the pacifism and some of these other things that they're kind of co-opting out of it. But
it's a hard one, that, isn't it? I mean, I know it's a can of worms and there's so many different layers and things that we could discuss, but you've kind of like already mentioned there the difficulties in that particular belief system, because it's different going to war and fighting on a global or a national or kind of government scale than it is to, like, as you said, stop a home invader. Like, they're very different. They're two extremely different things. Right. And it's kind of like, also, I'm sure there were people in the war that weren't conscientious objectors that did bear arms. Whether that's right or wrong, that's not what we're here to discuss, but I'm sure there are still people that went to great lengths to save as many people as they could, like the character, like the man in Hacksaw Ridge, who Andrew Garfield played, who was based on a real person. And and I don't know his name off the top of my head. I can't remember what that man's name was. I'm sure it's like a really famous name. So I probably sound really ignorant right now, but I'm sure that there were people that did fight in those environments that too did try to save as many people as they could, but then also shot other people because they were on the other side. So it's like, it's a really difficult one to wrap your head around. And like you said, if somebody was threatening your family, would you stand there and say that that's okay because that's kind of the promise you made when you were baptized? Or is it ingrained in us to use that fight or flight or freeze kind of built-in defense system that we have? I don't know. It's a really interesting one to ponder. I don't think there's a right answer. It's just something that I'm voicing as I'm thinking it through. But it's definitely an interesting thing to consider.
There are some examples. So this is Amish. You may remember probably 15 years ago now. Somebody went into an Amish schoolhouse and shot and killed a bunch of young children. This was back in Pennsylvania or Indiana, I don't know. And the Amish group forgave the shooter. The parents of these children, they forgave the shooter, they forgave the family. That they went to court and whatever and voiced, we forgive you. Christ told us to forgive. We forgive you. There are other stories of German Baptists specifically where there was one young family. They were in Ohio somewhere, and somebody tried to rob them, pulled them over, robbed them, and shot this husband and wife, and she died, and the husband was paralyzed or left a lot of kids behind. And they made a statement: hey, we forgive the person who shot them. We want to forgive you. It's very, very different from normal people's reactions to somebody who just killed, the mother of all these children or something like that, because it's not natural, right? And I think that's part of their Christian beliefs, and taking them as seriously as the German Baptists or the Anabaptists do, is Christ told us to forgive everyone. He forgave those who were crucifying him on the cross while he was up there, right? Like that's the model, and they do it really, really well. Whether or not that's a good thing in life, they typically put their money where their mouth is when it comes to this. I'm not going to say that there have been German Baptists who were not violent, but for the most part, as a group, they tend to follow those beliefs to the extreme.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely one of those that's worth thinking about on a much more in-depth level, kind of like the discussions that we've had on the podcast around circumcision in newborns in Judaism and whether that is right or wrong, and then the blood doctrine with Jehovah's Witnesses and whether that is right or wrong, and all of these things that these different faith-based groups practice that a lot of people have differing opinions on. I think it's definitely all worth considering on a much deeper level, and this is something that I would add to that list of conversations to have around ethics and morals and doctrine specific to different faith-based groups. But I had just a quick Google then. It's Desmond T. Doss was the name of the man that Hacksaw Ridge was based on. So anybody that's kind of screaming that at their headphones or car speakers or however they're listening, we've cleared that one up. And I do remember the I think it was the West Nichols Mine School that was the Amish shooting in Pennsylvania, and I only remember that one because I've been doing some research into conspiracy theories on school shootings supposedly being false and people have made them up. They never really happened. It's awful. So I've just kind of been doing a little bit of research into those recently, and I think it was the West Nickel Mine School. It was like a one bedroomed classroom in Pennsylvania. Is it Lancashire?
Yeah, Lancaster County. Yep.
So
lot of Amish in that area. Yep.
So that's the name of that one as well. But I just wanted to kind of go back to something that you mentioned previously, and that was around divorce and how it's taken extremely seriously within this group, almost as much as no sex before marriage and marriage between one man and one woman. So have you ever experienced anybody going through the divorce process in the church and how that may have changed their position in the church and how people viewed them, or anything around how seriously that particular piece of rhetoric is taken?
Yeah. One thing here that I parallel it to a little bit or contrast it with, and maybe this is more for the American listeners, but conservative evangelicalism, as it's kind of gotten out of hand over the past several years, is like anti-gay to the extreme. Like, it's shocking like that the main focus is on anti-LGBTQ protesting and all this stuff, and churches that are affirming are just sacrilegious. They don't even allowed to call themselves Christians, kind of thing. Well, in these churches that are screaming anti-gay stuff, they have multiple serial divorce, members who are on their third husband, third wife, whatever, and they're totally accepted as a member of that church or that group. It's no problem. In the German Baptist community, divorce is like as bad a sin as coming out as gay. If you, let's say you're a wife, and we had someone in our community this way. She had 3 kids. The husband decided he just wanted to leave, separated. He wanted to go do his own thing. She wouldn't divorce him unless he wanted the divorce that she would accept. But he just wanted to be separated, so he ran off, did his thing. She stayed single and raised her kids as a single mom for a really long time, until he decided he wanted to be reconciled, and then she accepted him back after that. That was the expectation for her. She would stay single, she would not divorce him, and she would wait for the Lord to convict him to come back. My great-grandmother, her husband, my great-grandpa, he left her. I think he was cheating on her for a bit, ran around, and then he left he was left or kicked out of the German Baptist. I'm not sure. And he never came back. She never remarried. I don't know if they got divorced or not, but she was single she died at like 105. So she was single for a really, really long time. There was some single people at our church who both had been divorced, or one or the other had been divorced, and they wanted to be married. They were a little older, maybe in their 50s. They wanted to be married, and the church would not perform the marriage. They wouldn't allow it because one or both had been divorced. And so they didn't get married. I mean, obviously they loved each other and they wanted to be together, but the church would not allow it. And so they stayed single. I mean, they take it very, very seriously.
That is so sad to think about, how many people are living such lonely lives because of how seriously this mm-hmm. is taken. And it's kind of almost infuriating as well to hear the story about, you know, the lady in your congregation, and also of your, was it your great grandma, you said?
Great grandma, yeah.
Yep. It's almost like these men, and I know that there'll be women out here that are like this as well. I'm not just saying, oh, men, but it's almost like they were like, I can have my cake and eat it too. Like, I can be married to this woman and have this family, and she will raise the kids and she will look after the home and she will do the things that are expected of her, as is written in the biblical text that we use and that we kind of use as a guide for our lives. But I can also go off and do what I want and know that she'll always be there and I can just come back whenever. So I'm going to go off and I'm going to frolic around and I'm going to have this freedom and do whatever, you know. And then when the grass is not greener on the other side, it's like, oh, just come back and she'll just take me back. And that is so frustrating.
She has to.
Hear. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because otherwise she is going to be excommunicated or shunned.
I don't know what would happen if she said, no, I don't want to be reconciled. I don't even think that for a woman in the church in this situation, that would even be an option. Unfortunately. I mean, of course she can leave, but you know, if you're a single woman, this is your community. Like, if you leave, you have no help. You are
absolutely
screwed. You're screwed. Yeah.
Which is what I was just going to mention then about kind of your mum converting into the church at 17, which is quite a young age, to then be married at 18. And then, you know, if that is the standard for women within this religious movement, where is the space and time to build up some level of independence and put, you know, your own money aside and have your own, like, you know, your own safety net to fall back on? It's very much encouraging that codependency so that you don't have the opportunity to remove yourself from this community if you want to. So straight away, you're encouraging that dependence on the community itself and your partner and the church.
Well, which is kind of the mark of obviously a cult, is that dependency in the group, so you can't leave. I mean, it's very misogynistic when you look outside of it and you care about egalitarianism or women's rights or equal rights. You know, I don't think. I mean, the German Baptists are very not egalitarian, but complementarian, they would say. You know, and I can go on a little more about that, but yeah, you mentioned getting married at 18. The women are expected to get married young. And I think, you know, typically you have a 24, 25-year-old man who would marry like an 18-year-old. Sometimes it's younger men getting married, but typically the men are expected to kind of work a little bit and be able to provide, so they would wait a few more years. I have attended multiple weddings where the bride was 17 at the time. I have heard of weddings where the bride was 16. That may have been, a while back. I don't think that's as common. My younger sister's friend is like 19 and already has a kid. You know, they typically, you'll find they have a baby about 9 months after the wedding date because they don't believe in birth control.
Okay.
The Lord's got your family plan in mind, and so you do what's natural, and you'll have kids when you have them.
Right.
Very large families, very, very large families. I know families with 12 kids.
Oh, wow.
12 plus. So, for the woman, career and making money is not encouraged. She's dependent on the husband. Her job is to get married and raise children.
Yeah.
And make the home and, be that homemaker. That is really her only options. There are some German Baptist women who became nurses. But, that's not because they need a second income. It's because she just really wanted to be a nurse and kind of fought for it, that career path. And it's a part-time gig, maybe, men are the men, right? They're the provider. They work 6 days a week, really, really hard. Sundays, there are absolutely no work, and the women raise the kids. There is nothing outside of that.
Not only is the wife dependent on the husband, but then the children are dependent on the mum, who is also the wife. So if you are married at 16, 17, 18 years old and you're having children 9 months to a year later, again, not only are you creating that dependency on the husband and the community and the church, but you're also not giving that person a chance to realize their own identity. They are then a wife and a mother, and that is who they are. And there is nothing, there's no opportunity for that person to
form an identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I
think it makes sense because in this all-in Christianity, there's this concept that your identity doesn't matter. Your identity is in Christ, right? He gives you your identity, and it's all written out. The New Testament talks about what men should be, what women should be, or tradition has told us what it should be. So that is your identity. You don't get to go, have some other identity. It doesn't matter. There are no singers up on stage. Everyone sings at the same level. So there is no individual who sticks out and above. There are no artists because we don't paint. That's vain. That's not what we do. Our identity is in Christ, raising kids so that we can have more Christians, more members of the church. I think that was one of the questions either in the BITE model or something that you'd asked about identity. And I go, well, no, your identity doesn't get taken away. You have a driver's license. You can go, you got the same name. Like, they don't change your identity. But now that I'm sitting here talking about it, your identity is stifled, or you're just not allowed to find it, maybe. I mean, here and there a little bit, but not like it should. I mean, when you get married at 17 and then have kids soon after, 17 or 18, have kids soon after, you don't get a chance to go find out what you like to do. What you're passionate about.
Kind of pick up the guitar or
no musical instruments, so they wouldn't do that anyways.
Is that because they're seen as worldly items?
I think it's just the tradition, right? They're very stuck in the 1800s. So even though they drive cars and have phones, certain things they're very traditional about, and that is the way they worship, which, the hymn book does not have musical notes in it. It's a small little black book, maybe the size of a pack of cards, a little bit bigger. And it's just got lines of text, like 4 lines of text in a block. And so what will happen if you're going to sing a hymn is a deacon will read off those 4 lines, and then they sing those 4, and then they stop, and the deacon reads off the next 4 lines, and then they sing those, stop, on and on. The reason they do that is not everybody had hymn books way back in the day. And so the deacon or somebody who had the hymn book would read off the lines, and then they would repeat after that. Well, they never dropped that tradition, even though everyone has hymn books.
Right. Okay.
So it's, if you're doing that still from the 1800s, there's no reason to ever even consider bringing an instrument into it. Newer movement is more accepting of it, but not in the traditional church services, maybe at home.
And the reason I mentioned sort of the worldly aspect is sometimes music is seen as a way to invite Satan in.
Like dancing and stuff.
Yeah. And and in terms of your individuality, just to circle back to that quickly, it was almost kind of already laid out for you that you're expected to not be an individual and not be independent, and that would be vain and narcissistic because of the conformity, the conformity part of the baptism, that, you know, where you are expected to say that you will kind of conform to the church and no other way of life or any other way of thinking. So it's kind of already put to you there that your independent traits don't matter, because it's only your work for Christ that is important. And I think that's really interesting that you, it's not like you don't know that's what's happening. You're very much kind of aware that that's what's expected of you.
It's not a bug, it's a feature, you know, like, yeah, you know, it's very, very sacrificial, we die to ourselves, you know, we take up our cross daily, we bless others. So if there's a member of the church who's sick, right, and they need help because we don't have traditional medical insurance, typically, the church pays all the medical bills, like 100%.
Okay.
If somebody needs help, like, for instance, if somebody's building a house, they'll do a couple weekends and they call them a work day, and everyone comes out and they'll frame up a house.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, so it's very, very community oriented, you know, and they'll even help some members outside the community as not really an outreach, but like, you know, if a need arises and stuff,
giving back to the community. Yeah. And that's great to hear, you know, that some of the, I'm guessing that members of the church, they give a tithe. So it's nice for members to know where that money is being directed to, I guess.
I would assume it's a tithe. I was never really a part of some of the background of the money and stuff. I do know that it's kind of as a need arises, right? So if we need to build a new church, then, you know, everyone gives as they can. And I don't know if tithe is expected. I don't remember that specifically, but, you know, it's not quite socialistic where, like, Hutterites, for instance, live in a community and there is no money on an individual level. German Baptists are not that way. They do have individual money. They work and own land on their own.
Right.
But if the need arises, they give and give and give until it's taken care of. You know, they sent a group down when Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana. My dad was a part of that group, and they went down and just volunteered, just helped out. You know, anytime there's stuff like that, like Haiti earthquakes, they'll send groups down to help. So they're very giving, and you know, they do want to do good.
When we talk about religion and faith and living your life using these biblical texts as guidebooks on how to do things the right way, these charitable efforts that you've just mentioned here, those are the types of things that we would expect to hear about, because that's surely the right way to live and the right way to be. And so it's kind of refreshing to hear that those things are happening, but also important to remember on the flip side of this, that there are women and most likely men too, who are living extremely lonely, stressful lives, taking care of an entire family because the other person's decided to leave them and they can't divorce. Otherwise they give up their entire livelihood. So,
well, that doesn't happen. That's few and far between. You know, I brought up some examples, but typically, I mean, you are expected to make that marriage work. And I think there's even more people in an absolutely miserable, sexless, unfun, just miserable marriage because it is not an option. And I'm sure their kids just hate it because their dad's abusive and angry and their mom's miserable because the marriage is miserable, and they don't tell people that.
And it's hard because I think back to me at the age of 17 or 18, and I didn't really know who I was or what I wanted.
No way,
and if I would have had to pick a life partner at that age, I probably would have made a ghastly decision. So but it is again refreshing to hear that this group is making positive efforts to have that charitable association with the more disadvantaged that we come across, especially when
it's very specific, right? So it's like, okay, a natural disaster hit, let's go help. But if it was like, hey, the AIDS epidemic is hitting the gay community, well, no, we're not helping that.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Hey, there's women down at the domestic violence shelter who need help. Well, we're not going to help the domestic violence shelter because they are progressive. They know it's not a Christian thing. So we'll help a woman who comes to us who needs help in a domestic violence situation, but we're not going to go fund, an organization that provides those services, because I will say that's one thing they don't do is work with organizations in a community like that. They would just work on a more individual level.
Okay.
But I don't want to take away from, some of the benefits of that mindset. I think one thing that's hard is, if you need help and you're an outsider coming in, you can, be accepted. They do want visitors to come to the church and see the church services and start to join the group. But if you leave, it's like, why would you ever leave this? Why would you leave us? Like, what is wrong with us that you think you need to go somewhere else to get your religion or your community? And that's probably where the whole high demand religion, aside from the crazy dress and the kissing on the lips and the church expectations and, how the services go and the singing, it's like trying to leave and how difficult that is and how much you're like ripping yourself out of a community is kind of where the high demand cult like.
Yeah. And I imagine a lot of the religious trauma that's associated with members trying to leave the group or remaining in the group and being very much kind of disenchanted and, like the conversation that I had around Jeffrey Wallace in his book, where we spoke about him being physically in, mentally out as a Jehovah's Witness. A lot of the religious trauma that comes with, having to stay in the group because it's too difficult to leave, is again very difficult. With the whole divorce thing, I'm guessing that widows and widowers, that's a slightly different situation because they're no longer with their partner, but do they have the opportunity to remarry it in that situation?
Yeah. Yep. So spouse dies, you can remarry. That's not an encouragement to murder your spouse. No, there have been several, like for instance, my grandma, her husband, my biological grandfather, he died and way back in like the 70s. And so she remarried. And so my grandparents on my father's side is a blended family. And that was, accepted. And it's encouraged actually, because it's not good for a man to be alone and he needs a helper. Right. So as long as you are in the sanctioned relationship, it's great. But not divorce, and not even because of infidelity, unfortunately. Right.
Yeah. So if it's found out that a husband or a wife is being unfaithful, is the marriage is just expected to continue and you work on trying to be a better husband or wife?
Yeah, you need to work on reconciliation. Absolutely. If one member does not want to, obviously they can go do whatever they want, but the more faithful member would then be expected to just be in that separation, be single, and wait, and pray and hope for the other spouse's reconciliation, which, in the case of the one woman I was talking about, took 15, 20 years, but well, maybe not 20, but 15 years. And eventually, he, I guess, came back around. I'm not sure. I don't know all the details, but he was gone for a long time and she just waited it out. Mm-hmm. Very, very tough for her, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I can imagine, well, I can't imagine being left with children to raise and then on top of that, the prospect of not meeting somebody else that can come into your life to, not necessarily help with the children even, but just to kind of alleviate some of the loneliness that comes from no longer having a life partner present in the family home. But if marriage is seen as such an important rite of passage that should be treated with so much respect, are the marriage ceremonies like really spectacular and special to behold, or are they just kind of typical church-like ceremonies?
Weddings aren't that. I mean, all I ever knew for until I was 18, I never went to a non-German Baptist wedding, or maybe one until I was 18. It's usually large. I mean, we're talking 300, 400, 500 people at these weddings. No music, so they'll designate a group of singers who typically, it's not like your traditional worship. It's like we picked some songs and then these a cappella singers are there. And then you stand up in front. It's pretty traditional. They've got people, bridesmaids, groomsmen standing with them. They do the kiss and everything. Typically the sermon does last a little longer than most other Christian wedding ceremonies. But then there's always food. I think that's expected. And then, it's just pretty plain. I mean, they put flowers out and stuff, but it's not, I don't think that the focus is to have this massive, extravagant, wedding. Obviously no alcohol because there's no alcohol at all at the church. And I always thought they were pretty boring, to be honest, because I was just a kid at a boring wedding, but I wouldn't say they stand out as odd compared to others. When
you talked in your communication with me about communion, you did mention that there was wine. So is there no?
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
So it's okay.
So alcohol is not something that you say that you drink. You don't go buy it. I mean, German Baptists drink. They do. It's kind of like the joke about the Jews don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah. The Protestants don't recognize the Pope as the leader of the church, and the Baptists do not recognize each other at the liquor store. They do drink, just not together. So, if there was you have people over for dinner. That's one thing German Baptists do a lot, is have families over for dinner, 3 or 4 families, a big old table, and cook a lot of food. No alcohol. But if each one of them may just end up go home and have a glass of wine or something like that, or a beer, just depending on how conservative and plain they are. So it's just not talked about. The communion for wine is just kind of like a really sweet, you just take a sip. It is alcoholic, but it's not.
Right.
It's just kind of like, I don't know if the Catholic Church also does alcoholic wine for their communions.
And
so now this is probably a good segue to talk about the communion process, because it is not just a wafer and wine on some random Sunday.
Okay.
It's a thing. Do you want to transition to that, or?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yep.
Okay. All right. So they call it Love Feast, not communion, and it's each district would do it once a year. So in my state, there are 3 districts. So basically, people from the surrounding districts will come in for this. They'll drive several hours. I mean, some will fly in if they've got family, so they may fly from the East Coast to the West Coast to stay with family for these, drive up from other states, maybe 12, 14 plus hours. at our house, so nobody stays in hotels at all. Everyone always stays in somebody else's house.
Okay.
So at our house, our basement would have, dividers up, and we'd have 3 or 4 families staying at our house.
Wow,
and it was a lot of fun because we always had people with, boys my age and stuff. And so we just play outside, running around, hooting and hollering, had a great time. I mean, it was honestly like the funnest weekend of the year for us as kids, just because you get to stay up late and you're with people that you don't get to be with all the time. And so it kind of starts Friday. Friday is people getting stuff ready because they have a lot of meals and stuff. So they're cooking food. And I think they do maybe have a service on Friday. We never went to that. Saturday morning, they would have a church service for about 2 hours. We didn't go to that one either. Our family didn't go because, I don't know, we just didn't want to. But Saturday evening from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. was the communion service. So it's 4 hours. And the kids had to be there the whole time. And we weren't members, so we weren't participating. We just had to go sit in the back corner on a bench and just be quiet.
Wow, that's a long time to expect kids to kind of just sit around, not blowing off any steam.
Very much so. As we were raised, I mean, there was no children's church, so we would sit for 2-hour services every Sunday morning on a hard wooden bench, being quiet.
I remember those types of benches from assemblies in school, and even 15 minutes on one of those is not nice.
Well, there were a lot of times we got taken out behind the car out in the parking lot, got spankings because, we were acting up in church. It was very, very much sit down, be quiet, be respectful. But so we were well trained, I guess, for this 4-hour service. And my grandma is awesome. She would make these, like, she called them like communion goodie bags or something, and there'd be gum and candy and notepads and pens and maybe like a little toy. And so she was really, really great. And, that's part of what made, I think, Communion Weekend a good memory for me as well. But there's a lot of rituals here. So the men and women are always separated. Even on Sunday church, women sit on one side, men sit on the other side. Same for communion. Women are upstairs, men are downstairs in the church building. And they just, there's a lot of talking about what these rituals are. So one thing they do is they eat the Last Supper together, as Jesus and the disciples did in the room. So they break bread. They have a special bread called communion bread that they make out of flour and butter. And they would eat like beef, so boiled beef. And then there's a soup made with the beef stock. And then you would cut loaves of bread into squares and then put it in there. And I called it soggy bread soup. I don't know what it was actually called, but it's just like you use the spoon to like eat this soggy, sopped up bread in beef broth. And it sounds disgusting. And, the texture is not great, but it was awesome. I loved it growing up. But so you would do that. You would eat together and kind of a solemn meal. And that took a while. And then they would do the wine first. And so each member would have the cup, and they would turn to the member beside them and say, like, this is the blood of Christ, which was shed for us for the remission of our sins, or something along those lines. They'd have a mantra, and the other person would say, yes, it is. And then they would take the cup, take a sip, say that to the next member. Now imagine one cup going around like 200 or 150 members, and they're each saying the same thing to each other. It took, 30 minutes just to get the wine all the way through. And then they would do it with the bread. So they would take a piece of bread and break it off. This is the bread. This is the body of Christ, which was broken for us. And then, yes, it is. And they pass it on and eat the bread. And then, so that took another half an hour while they're preaching or singing during this time, and a lot of hymns. And then they do feet washing. So the members take turns washing each other's feet. So they take their socks off, their shoes off. They've got bowls of water and towels, and they're clearing out benches and moving tables. And, one person will go down the line and wash feet. And I'm sure they have a mantra, we wash each other's feet in remembrance of Christ or something like that. And so it's very humbling, right? There's not a lot of room for pride in the German Baptist community. So it's kind of a neat thing where it's like, hey, I'm no better than you. Jesus was showing his disciples he was no better than them, and he wanted to show you how to be a servant. So we're remembering that.
Yeah.
And then, so that's all done. Then they would pass the holy kiss. So we're back to the weirdness. Each member would do another mantra about why we greet each other with a holy kiss as commanded in scriptures or something. And so they would just kiss the member beside them. And then the guy would say the same thing to the guy beside him. And so they would pass the holy kiss all the way through the group. It was really, really weird talking about it now. It's like somewhere in 2 Corinthians, I think it says the holy kiss, but yeah.
It's strange because I know that this is a very sacred practice in a very much practiced religious group, but it almost reminds me of like a college drinking game, like you know, where like there's this thing that people used to do where you would put like a playing card between your lips and you had to like suck on the card to stop it from dropping, and you had to pass it to the person next to you, and you had to like get this playing card all the way around the circle without dropping it, and if it dropped you had to kiss the person who dropped the playing card. Like, and I'd never seen this before, and I remember going to an American house party and they were playing this card game, and I was like, what is going on? Why are people just passing like a playing card from person to person? And I know that a college drinking party or university drinking party is absolutely nothing like a holy religious practice. That's just a vision that popped into my mind when you're talking about a group of people sitting around a table passing around this holy kiss. It does paint quite a picture, really, and again, I mean, it's strange. What age are you expected to start participating in the holy kiss? Is it once you're baptized, or is it once you are of a certain age?
Yeah, you have to be a baptized member to participate in any of the communion or love feast stuff. So as kids, we're not doing any of it. I mean, they would, slip you some bread to keep you happy or something, but for the most part, you weren't even eating the Last Supper portion. So sometimes you would like have brought some food out in your car, so you slip out and go eat some food and come back. But like I said, when are you expected? Between 13 to 18 is when you kind of are expected to have made a decision, because you're of the age of reason and are expected to join the church and be a Christian, be a German Baptist.
So you might be like 13 and be included in this holy kiss?
Yes.
Oh, that's strange.
And also drinking the wine, which again is just a sip, and
like if you're sitting next to like somebody that's a lot older, like, and related or not related, I don't even know. What if you're sitting next to your deacon and he's like 60 years old and he's going to be like, here's a kiss, and you're like 15? I don't know. It's just strange. Is it strange though? And people might be listening and think like it's not that strange. It is strange,
no,
isn't it?
It is very strange. I mean, when you grew up in it, no, it's not. I remember taking a friend from school, because I went to a non-German Baptist school, although it was Mennonite. I mean, it was founded by Mennonites, but I took a friend who had no idea of any of this stuff to church, and he's like, I think I forgot to tell him about the kissing, and he's like, oh my God, dude, these two dudes just kissed in front of me. And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about that. And then we also, like, anytime you pray during a church service, you get on your knees. So everyone gets off the bench, turns around, and puts their elbows on the bench, and they're on their knees during prayer. And he didn't know that either. So he's like freaking out, like everyone moves all at the same time, and he didn't know what was happening.
Yeah, I can imagine that's quite unsettling when that happens, like almost like there's no cue or anything. It just kind of happens spontaneously out of nowhere. Yeah, I can imagine that's very strange.
There is a little more about communion. So that's Saturday night, obviously. Then you're all done, the 4 hours. I mean, there's a lot going on. And then the next Sunday, they have like a really early service. Our family, usually we would have like breakfast at home with all the families, so we didn't really go to that one either. We weren't very good German Baptists, I guess. And then Sunday church is like 2.5 hours, and usually there's so many people. The whole upstairs is filled, the downstairs is filled. Sometimes they've had to like sit outside and stuff. And after that, right at the end of that, they'll get all the kids lined up, and the kids go through the sanctuary, and the head elder is breaking off communion bread and giving it to the kids, talking to them. I don't know if this is kind of a way to get the kids like used to like why we celebrate communion, Jesus' death and resurrection and his broken body. And so I don't know if that was just our district. It seemed like other districts did the same thing. And so everyone's singing hymns while the kids are walking through getting communion bread, which, it was always fun. We always liked that because we liked the bread. And then we would have a meal. And usually there were so many people that we had to have it in 2 sittings. And it was always the same thing. It was boiled beef, that soggy bread soup, like apple butter, which is kind of like it's just like a spread to put on the bread. Pickles, beets, pie. And so we would always eat together on our big eating hall in the basement. And then there might be some other, like, there was a youth group thing. They called it Young Folks because they're old and like to call things weird stuff. So they called it Young Folks. It's probably named by some old dude. And so they would get together and play volleyball and hang out. And Sunday was kind of the leaving day. Everyone would head home Sunday or Monday. So it was a really involved weekend of just community and traditions and eating.
And do you think that communion has abstained for a couple of years whilst the pandemic's unfolded?
I don't think so. I think initially when the pandemic hit, they did stay home for a few Sundays. I think for the most part, they have just done church as normal.
Right.
Doesn't really matter to them. The Lord has our days numbered. It's not political for them. They don't care about being asked to wear a mask. I think some of the younger members might be more political, but as a group, they don't really care. Like, okay, so the governor of our state said you have to wear masks. Well, doesn't matter. He has no real authority over us.
I see. Yeah. I guess my mind went straight to COVID when you talked about the kiss being passed around and the wine being passed around and everyone kind of drinking from the same thing. So, and to me, I'm thinking straight away like, I don't know about that these days.
Well, I mean, every Sunday, as they're greeting each other before they head into church, they're all kissing and shaking hands and, all that. So it's happening every Sunday. Communion is a minuscule part of spreading COVID for this group.
I suppose so.
I know they would probably stay home if they're feeling sick. I mean, they're not intentionally just jerks. They do believe that COVID's a real disease and it's killing people. And so they would stay home if they're sick. But, and I know COVID has affected quite a few members of the group. I can't think of anyone who's died, but I haven't really been a part of the group for a while. So I guess I don't know.
And you've spoken briefly about the expectations of sort of outward appearance, with things like how women are expected to dress with the headdresses. And you also mentioned in your writing to me that men have to have beards.
If they're a deacon or an elder, they have to have a beard.
What if you're like one of these guys that just can't grow a beard?
Then you've got a scraggly, crappy looking beard. Yep. You see some guys who, they think it's biblical to grow a beard, and it's just patch. We call them Wild West beards because there are lots of wide open spaces. And so they'll also some trim, like if they care more about hygiene, but the older, more conservative ones would not trim the beard at all. And so some of our jokes, when we were younger, is like, how many buttons is your beard? So like buttons of the vest that they wear. So it's like, okay, if you got a 2-button beard, that's down to like below your nipples. If you got a 4-button beard, that's down to your waist.
How many buttons is your beard? I like that.
Yep. And no mustache. Now, I think that's because the mustache way back when was like a stylish thing where men would like wax them and curl them and stuff. And so they did not want stylishness. And so no mustache are allowed. And I think part of the stylish thing is also like in the way they dress, obviously no flashy colors. They don't want the women to wear dresses that are gaudy or like bright red or bright pink. They cannot wear stuff like that. It's very plain, muted colors, not a lot of patterns. The men, when they wear pants, they're called broadfalls because they do not have zippers. Why? I don't know. There's some rule in the rule book it's called the Minute Book. Some rule somewhere that's like no zippers, and so you wear pants that they button down and then they have a flap in the front so that the buttoned area is covered. So I don't know if you can look up broadfalls and.
That sounds really interesting. I think I'd heard something about the Amish community not having zips on their clothes.
Yep.
I remember thinking when it had first been put to me that the Amish community don't use zips, I remember thinking, how are zips like technology? Because in my mind, years ago, I was thinking, all I know about Amish people is that they don't believe in technology, but how are zips anything to do with like mobile phones and computers and things like that?
I mean, it's like with any group. It's not just German Baptists or Christians or evangelicals or Orthodox Jews or Jehovah's Witnesses. Everyone picks and chooses what they think is acceptable and not. And a lot of times there's not consistency in that. Like with evangelical Christianity, there is no consistency with what they pick and choose out of Scripture, to hold fast on. Each group picks and chooses their own things. And the German Baptists and Amish are every bit as guilty. No zippers, but we'll have eyeglasses and we'll have cars and electricity. Like
yeah, they're very good points. Yeah, very, very, very good ways of explaining things away. Very rational questions are easily explained away. I've just looked up these broadfold pants and I see exactly what you're talking about here with the little flap, which is interesting.
And I think the flap is to cover the opening where like the buttons go, like where the zipper traditionally would be, because it might be immodest in case that opens up or something. And so that flap covers it. For women, the dress. So if you're listening to this and can Google old German Baptist brethren, and you'll see the woman's dress has a cape covering their shoulders, back, and breasts. And it's because the dress isn't necessarily super loose. And so there is the outline of the breasts, and that might be too sexual or something maybe. And so they wear a cape that's sewn onto the dress that kind of covers that. Almost, I don't want to compare it to a burqa, not a burqa, but maybe a hijab or something for Muslim women.
But if anybody's watched The Handmaid's Tale, it's kind of like, it's not, they're not in the color red like they are in The Handmaid's Tale. There's muted colors like you mentioned before, kind of like pastel pinks and greens and beiges and browns. But absolutely, like if you can picture what they wear in The Handmaid's Tale, bonnets included, that's kind of what this dress wear looks like here. That's very, very interesting. And I'm just seeing here a picture of two men talking. One has a beard with no moustache and one has no facial hair. So there I recognize straight away that one of those men is in a position of power.
Well, so it's very much up to, I think I'm even looking at the same picture you are. So it's up to the man, right? So the one on the right is not a deacon or elder, for sure. The one on the left probably isn't either. It's just the style.
Right.
If you went to go be a deacon or elder, though, you would be required to have grown a beard.
That's so funny because my partner's got a friend who just does not have, he just doesn't, he leaves his face for weeks and weeks and he might have like 2 or 3 bristles on his chin or on his cheeks. There's no defining facial hair whatsoever, and I just can't imagine like the pressure some men must feel trying to grow one of these really like long, impressive looking beards that kind of go like a forebeard. Like imagine if you saw someone's forebeard and thought, I can't even have a one beard.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much as it's not about outward appearance, which is why they wear the plain uniform and all this stuff. It very much is, because you're supposed to be in the world, but not of it, not conform to the world and wear what they wear. Yet, and the whole purpose was so that you don't stand out. You just, you're not bringing attention on yourself,
right?
Because you want to be humble. And there's a sense of pride in that, because as you walk through town, you're getting stared at. You are bringing attention to yourself. You're prideful on, look how pious I am by wearing these broadfalls and these dresses with capes, and look at my beard and my black hat. I'm different than you. I am a part of something better. And so in a way, they're almost hypocritical about the purpose of why they dress the way they are. And of course, I don't want to put a blanket statement on everyone, because not everyone has that. You couldn't be a member and not dress like that. Let's put it that way.
So there was something you mentioned towards the start of the episode, and I want to make sure that I go back through and kind of gather all the information on some of these things that you've mentioned and said that we could go into more detail on. And one of those is the fact that you now work in IT, but technology was something that was very much put to you that you should avoid, should not kind of be involved in. So how is technology a restriction within the church itself? Like, how is it put to you when you're growing up that it's something you should stay away from?
The church's relationship with technology is interesting, because in newer church buildings that get built, they'll put a speaker system in, because maybe they need to have people in the basement and they need to be able to hear. So they'll have a microphone and speakers. Obviously no music gets played over it, but we want everyone to hear. They'll have, actually you can call in, like, to their annual meetings, which happen once a year. You can call in a hotline and listen to what's being said. So they broadcast what they're doing. The new conference has a website. The old conference says no internet whatsoever. So it's kind of interesting. Like, we grew up, no TV in our house. You don't watch movies. No one's allowed to watch movies. Even the radio isn't really allowed. We always kept a radio in our car, but other people in the church would take the radio out of the vehicle. So they'd buy a brand new vehicle and pull the radio out immediately, and that's it. My grandparents always covered it. So my grandpa made like a special cover that he could Velcro on and cover the radio. And the thing about technology, it kind of pulls into media. So, I'll get back to how I got into IT and what that looks like. But there are kids who would go around and look in people's cars and see who still has a radio in their car, like during church, like peek in, okay, these people have a radio. They're obviously not good. Why do they have a radio? Well, we don't listen to it. Well, it doesn't matter. You should have that radio out. If you get caught watching movies, you're in trouble. So my parents had watched a movie or something. This was quite a while ago. I don't know if I was born or not at that point. I don't think I was. But they were talking about it, or somebody heard it and found out and told the elders. And so they had to stand up in front of the congregation and apologize, and repent of the sin of watching a movie. And other members have had to do similar things. I think they've chilled out a little bit on it, maybe in the new conference. But that's not something you do. We would watch movies. Like, if my grandparents on my mom's side were not German Baptist, and they would have a TV, so we could kind of watch movies, but it was very rare. Listening to the radio, we would, when driving around, usually just local Christian stations, or like other Christians who grew up in America might recognize Adventures in Odyssey, which was a Christian program for kids where they would like talk. I don't know. It's just a Christian thing. So we would listen to that on our way home from school. We were a more progressive family, I would say, in the community. Very at odds with the conservative members of the community. So aside from the media, like, you're not even reading like secular comics or books, right? You would not read fiction, non-Christian fiction, or secular fiction. That would be too vain. It's just that's a waste of time. You should be reading scripture, or they had a publication called The Vindicator that people would get. You should read that, or, something that's uplifting, not something that's secular or vain or for your own enjoyment.
Right.
It's not uplifting. It's not good. So then when it comes to IT, businessmen would have computers. They've got the internet to run their business. Most homes would have computers. They would embrace technology to some extent.
Yep.
So it was never you can't go beyond a computer. We always had a computer at the home. It's just technology is not something we want to trust or focus on, right? You would never see a techie, with the latest iPhones, and he's got the smart home and all that stuff. That's just not the style. I mean, there may be one or two, but for the most part, you just don't trust it. You don't need it. You don't want it. You just kind of live a plain life. And I know there's, if there are ex-German Baptists or current German Baptists who are listening to this, they're probably going, what are you talking about? We embrace all sorts of technology. Yes, but think about some of the more plain or old conference members. That's the bulk of the German Baptist Church, and they don't embrace it. And that's part of why that split in 2009 between old conference and new conference was because of the internet. So they say it's not, and the letter that was written where you sign and say, I'm leaving the church and starting this other one, said basically the church is kind of the final authority on rules, right? So here's the rules. You either submit to the church or you don't, and we're kicking you out. And part of that was the internet, whether or not members should use the internet. So the old conference members do not use the internet, or if they do,
right,
they have a very special program called a private garden or a walled garden. And basically it's a company that installs software on your computers that you cannot get to the internet. And you can get emails in, but they monitor them or something. So it's very, very limited. And the old conference split again. And within the past year over that, they don't even want that level of internet access, which is basically nil, but they don't even want that, and they split again.
And do you think that comes from sort of pushing technology away, or fear of people using the internet as a research tool to look into kind of?
I think, a lot of it is okay, so what are you going to do on the internet? There's all sorts of bad things. There's atheist material that's going to pull you away and just tear down your faith. There's pornography that we do not want men to be dragged into that, because it's an epidemic that's taken over all these other churches. We're just not even going to make that an option. Just you can watch movies or YouTube videos that are not edifying, not pleasing to the Lord. And so since you have this portal to all this crap, yes, it can be good, but it's mainly crap, so we just don't want it. And the new conference is well, we all, it's individual. We need to make our choices to, not participate in those things. Because even if you don't have the internet, you can still go be a bad person and, make bad choices. So, just you make your own choices, you make your own good choices and be accountable. And if that makes sense.
It's just interesting, and it's interesting as well that people are positioning themselves and saying, the church is the ultimate authority, but there is, you can follow the New Testament, but it's still a very old text, and there's nobody on this plane who can give the correct answers around whether we should use technology or the internet and things like that. So it is interesting, because should the movements be progressive and move forward with technology so they stay relevant in this day and age, or should they stick true to the biblical texts that they practice and worship to stay as true to the faith as possible? It's another one of those interesting questions to ponder on a deeper level. And is probably one that is argued within this particular group quite often, especially when people go out and buy a brand new car or vehicle and take the radio out. That is such a bizarre notion to me, because buying a new vehicle comes with technology in itself. In this day and age, you know, a lot of cars are basically run on computers that have diagnostic tools inside them, where you take it to a garage and the mechanic plugs something into the car and the computer will tell him where the fault in the car is. So there's kind of that level of technology, but you'll take the sound system out of the car because you're not allowed to listen to music or the radio. So that in itself is a very interesting thing to consider. But
even and they take the radio out of tractors too. So by and large, the German Baptists are based in rural areas, and so they're farmers, agriculture. You know, that's how I grew up, and so with that comes a lot of driving in tractors. Well, the old school, old order, you know, type German Baptists, they will take the radios out of the tractors, and I have spent many an hour in my youth sitting in a tractor wondering, like, how in the world you could sit there for that long with no radio. That would just be mind numbing, you know. And I think the idea is, well, just sing and make hymns in your heart to the Lord, or whatever that phrase is, and talk to God, and, you know, just focus on scripture and everything else. It's like, for like 14 hours straight.
Yeah, it is. When you say it like that, like, I'm thinking, oh, what would I do for 14 hours? Like, usually I'd be doing like social media posts on my phone, or, you know, replying to emails. And then I'm like, okay, if I don't have my phone, what do I do? Oh, I'll pick up a book. Oh, but I can't read anything, so I can't do that. Okay, so I'm driving in my car and I don't have my music, and I don't have like a podcast or an audio book, and I'm like, what would I do for 14 hours if I didn't have, like, can't do a crossword, I guess, because I probably don't know enough about pop culture and secular things to be able to participate in a crossword. So then I'm thinking, I don't even know what my go-to would be. If I'd be at a loss, absolutely at a loss.
Well, you're sitting in a tractor, so you can't really write crossword puzzles. I mean, you're steering and stuff. So like for me, it'd be like podcasts or music or something like that. For the more conservative members, it'd just be a lot of silence, and I think you would start to go crazy a little bit. But I do remember one time with a member, we were driving to the airport, and they didn't have a radio in their car and stuff. This was with a friend of mine, and so it's the middle of the night. We're like catching a real early flight, and we're driving to the airport, and the person in the front is singing hymns, and in the car the whole way. And it's like, you know, so that's probably what they do, just sing to themselves. Or
I think if I was left alone with my own thoughts for that amount of time, I think that'd be quite dangerous.
Yes, I would say so.
But then again, we're used to having all the access to this technology. So perhaps if you'd never had it, you would know how to deal better in that particular situation. It's another one of those things that I always try and think about both sides and try and kind of position myself in both situations. So yeah, I realize I am the type of person that leans heavily on my technology, but if I'd never had access to it and didn't have it as an everyday, yeah, absolutely. So at what point did you finally decide to leave the church, and what did that look like? Conversations with your family, preparations to kind of not go back. What was that like for you?
I wasn't a full-on member, so my experience in leaving was a little bit different. My sister was, and so were my parents, and so I've got plenty of stories from their perspective on what that's like.
Right.
I knew as a young person, like, my idea of what it was to be a Christian was to grow a beard, to wear a black hat, to farm, and to take your wife and kids to church and read the King James Bible, because they only read the King James version. They're King James only, which has lots of other problems with how you interpret scripture. But anyways, that was my idea of what it was to be a Christian. And I remember as a young kid thinking, I want no part of this. It's too boring. And if it's the only truth, I don't care. I got a spanking for saying that to my parents, saying I'm never going to get baptized and be a German Baptist when I was like 6 or something. I remember that. Probably because I don't know, my parents just weren't really hearing what I was saying or what it was. But so growing up, church services on Sundays were boring. I kind of had like ADHD a little bit. I'm very hyperactive. My brain's always going a million miles an hour. So to sit for 2 hours on a hard bench, listening to some old dude with a white beard, drone on and on about who
Things
knows
that
what.
happened a very long time ago. Yeah.
Well, just it's like the concepts were over my head as a kid. You're not in children's church. You're not hearing Bible stories. You're just listening to an old guy say words. And it was very boring. I hated it. I hated church, dreaded going to church. I would pass the time by like picking certain items in the room to count, like blades on the fans up there. How many blades of fans are there? Just bored as all get out. So I always knew I wanted to leave. I just didn't have a way out. My sister was a baptized member, and she started dating somebody who was not a member.
Okay.
And so I think they'd agreed that like he wasn't going to join. And so she's like, well, it's fine, I'll leave. So she ended up leaving at about 18, I think. And I was 15. And so she started going to an conservative evangelical church in our same town. And I'm like, whatever, first take it out of here. I'm with her. I'm going.
Yeah.
I think my parents just realized like they can't keep me in. They would try and like ground me by sending me to the youth, the German Baptist youth group. Okay. I didn't want to go. And so they didn't ground me by keeping me from it. They'd say, no, you're forced to go and be with them. It's like, the worst. So I left with my sister and started going to these other churches. And I had been in a very, very, very conservative, politically evangelical church for probably 10 or 11, 12 years until I recently left at the beginning of COVID.
Wow.
That's a whole nother story.
Wow. I didn't even realize, Jordan, that there was like a second thing that there.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
I got a second half. Yes. So it was very, very, very like Trump is our savior type of church. COVID, like, no, what are you talking about?
Jordan,
we need to be back in church.
That would have been fascinating to discuss.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot about that, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about deconstruction of American evangelicals, and a lot of people are leaving the faith because of Republicans, Trump, COVID, and
it's like a
certain
whole
Christians' reaction. Yeah, so that is me. I'm a part of that. So the German Baptist is very different because it's not like Trump, Republicans, conservatism. That's just they don't want to be a part of politics. We're outside of it. The other church I was at was very much like, as Trump started coming on, we were preaching like republicanism from the pulpit and very, very much end times oriented, like Jesus is coming back like tomorrow, like apocalypse is happening kind of. Yeah. Anyways, I don't want to get off track. I'm sorry. So as my sister left, the interesting thing is what happened to her. She had friends in the church that, just flipped. And it was like, when you're in, we're friends, we're good, you're saved, you're happy. When you're telling me you're leaving now, well, I had a friend of my sister's who was like, the only reason, he told me this, your sister's leaving and all this. Yeah, okay. The only reason she wants to leave is because she wants to wear pants. She wants to get her ears pierced, wear makeup, and you guys want to go to rock concerts every Sunday. Because that's what they viewed like a worship band on the stage with guitars and stuff. You're going to a rock concert.
And what if those are the things that she wants to do?
Yeah. Well, it's like you're leaving because you want to go live in sin, right? Like you're going to this conservative church, that's Christian, but you want to go live in your sin and do what you want. Like you don't value our beliefs anymore. And there's my mom, because my parents also left a couple of years after that.
Right.
And, some of the ways my mom lost friends. I mean, straight up, like, you are pulling yourself out of a community where you leave, we're not friends anymore.
I hate hearing about these stories where friendships and love is conditional. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's not like a shunning, like the Amish do or Jehovah's Witness, where it's extreme. It's more.
It feels like it's like not a forced shunning, but a decisive one on the part of people who remain in the religious group that you're leaving. It's like they just almost decide to shun you, even though it's not enforced.
As a German Baptist, all of your activities are German Baptist related. So, okay, we're having a singing, right? We're getting together and we're singing for hours and worshiping and doing all this stuff. You're no longer a German Baptist. Well, you can't come to the singing, is my guess. I would assume. I don't ever remember any non-German Baptists going. So you cannot participate. Now, I'm sure, and I know my parents still have lots of friends in the German Baptist Church. I guess I'm still acquaintances with some people there. Most of my friends have left or are not members. But there are people that are good friends that my mom has still been with or my dad or whatever. And, they do business with, or they go to dinners with. And, but for the most part, most of my parents' good friends who were apart have also left. And so that's kind of made it a little easier. They had to deal with that you're in and I'm not mentality.
Yeah.
So that's probably helped some of the other ones who are like, well, we're not friends anymore. Well, my mom can tell, another hour or two's worth of stories on what it was like to leave.
I imagine that your mom and your dad have those stories. Do you feel like they, as you and your sister told them that you decided to leave, and they tried to kind of get you to go to the young folks group? Do you think that your dad especially felt a level of pressure to keep you in the fold, because so much of your family history is intertwined with this particular group?
I don't think my dad cares as much about the family history.
No.
I don't know if part of that was because his dad died when he was very young.
Right.
And maybe that was traumatic for him. My grandpa fell off a roof and was in a coma for 7 years, 6 or 7 years.
Oh my goodness.
And they cared for my grandma, his wife, and my great grandma, my grandpa's mom, cared for him in the coma for 7 years. And that's how my dad knew his dad growing up, was a vegetable laying in a bed in the living room.
Oh my goodness.
And, so I don't know if there was trauma there with family history and stuff. I don't know. I haven't really talked to my dad about it, but he hasn't seemed to, the lineage, our last name and our lineage and our German Baptist history doesn't really matter to him. Now, my dad's older brother, my uncle, he is very obsessed with our family lineage and history, and he's Old Conference German Baptist.
And this is the family member that's gone through and plotted the family tree and the history.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So, maybe there's a correlation between his interest in our family lineage and that matters to him, and my dad not caring as much, maybe. My dad's always been a little bit of a rebel. And so, growing up, I don't know if just kind of growing up without a father figure in the home for a really long time, because my grandma didn't end up remarrying until my dad was an older teenager.
Okay.
So he didn't really have that father figure growing up, and kind of was just rebellious. And my dad never grew a beard. He didn't wear a black hat. He kept the radios in the vehicles.
Yeah.
So he wasn't a real good German Baptist, I would say. Funny enough, it's like, and I think that's part of why it was easier for me to leave. It wasn't like, well, I had to just say, screw you, family, I'm out of here, I'm running off. It's just like, hey, I'm going to this other church with my sister. Okay, fine. We can't keep you in. Who cares? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And my mom, I think what was hardest for her, like my dad, it was not hard for him to leave. I wouldn't say, but for my mom, Uh, she left. She didn't really have friends. I mean, she was a teenager in high school, rebellious teenager, and she met my dad and fell in love and converted and got baptized. And this was her life now, her family, her community, all of her friends, everything. Shortly after they got married, they also moved a couple states away to start farming in the state that we're in. And there was actually they came up and started with a couple other families, the German Baptist district here in our town. So they were in the beginnings in the 80s, like when it started here in this town. And so they were, it was like not just the insular German Baptist community. It was like, we're in a brand new area where we know nobody, we have nothing.
Wow.
We're trying to farm. And we came up with 2 or 3 other families starting this German Baptist community. So that just like intensified the isolation and the friendships that my mom made with those other women and those groups. So to then, 20, 30 some years, 20-ish some years later to leave, that's even harder on so many other levels, I would say. For her.
Yeah. Especially if, like you mentioned earlier on in the episode, she maybe feels like she was never fully accepted in the first place, to have that kind of uphill battle, and then the big transition of then leaving the church after all of that. In itself must be a whirlwind.
She was accepted by some of the members. So, there's kind of a dichotomy and that came out in the split where my parents left. The old conference members, they were never family friends. Like, it was almost like the church was honestly split well before it actually split, based on the old conference, new conference. Like, you kind of fell into one of two groups. And we were never really friends with the ones from the old conference anyways, because we just had different values. And oddly enough, those values are things like whether you wear a sweater over or under your cape of your dress, or, whether you wear broadfalls, or whether you Bible studies, for instance. So the old conference believed you should not have Bible studies in your home. The Bible should only be studied by these elected elders on Sundays. And if you are studying the Bible in your home individually, as a small group, that's an opportunity for Satan to come in with doctrine that is not legitimate.
Right.
And so they were fundamentally against it. And it was like, I remember that being a big problem when I was attending a German Baptist Bible study. Some old conference members are like, I was shocked to hear. I was like, wait, you don't approve of people studying the Bible in their home in a group? Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So she was accepted by the new conference style members, and that's who we hung out with. The old conference style, we never really.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, one of my next questions, one of the last questions really, before I ask you what advice you have for others who may be in similar groups and looking to leave, is actually like, what has your life been like since? And I feel like that's a redundant question, because you've got years of being involved in this other group, which is like a whole other thing, like a whole other 2-3 hour episode. So
yeah,
are you free of religion at the moment? Are you involved in another religious group? Where does your faith lie currently?
Yeah. So, since I've been out, it's been a while. Like I said, one of my best friends was a member for a long time. And so I always stayed in touch with him and knew what was going on. He's since left, and I've kind of helped him through that process, because his dad is an elder in the church, and his whole family is staunchly German Baptist. So, other friends and acquaintances have left. And so in these past 10 years, while I've attended these other churches, I have still been kind of connected in a way. My grandparents are still members and still attend. But the rest of my aunts and uncles, for the most part, except for the one I mentioned, they're out. I think when I was leaving, I was just trying to get out. I didn't care what it was. And I ended up at very conservative evangelical church because it was the closest to what I knew.
Right.
It was, they call themselves non-denominational, but really that's just because they painted over the Baptist sign on the outside of it. And I liked it because it was different. They preached the Bible in the New King James Version, so it was like, oh, this is refreshing. I don't have to hear all these these and thous. And I made a community there. I met my wife there. We had 2 kids while attending, and then COVID hit, and my wife has an autoimmune disorder.
Okay.
And so we were taking things very seriously at the beginning because we just didn't know. We didn't want to risk it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
My immediate family took the opposite train of thought, which that hurt a lot.
I can imagine for your wife that must have been quite difficult as well, to feel like her health was not being taken seriously at that point.
Yep. And the church was making news as one of the first churches in our area after some of the mandates, stay at home kind of a thing. They were holding church services again on the news saying,
right,
we don't care. We're getting people. We're not going to be afraid of this virus.
We need to meet together.
Yep. And they, ever since, they've just doubled down into conspiracy theories and, the right wing, like the January 6th insurrection was like a patriotic thing. I don't want to speak for everybody at this evangelical church, but, it's most of the people in the leadership. And so my wife and I ended up leaving. I left because of their COVID and politics. My wife left because she just wanted a smaller church that she liked more. Yeah. And since then, I've gone through a deconstruction of, my beliefs in biblical literalism, or fundamentalism, I guess is kind of the term. And yeah, like you said, that's another several hour thing of my experiences, learning young earth creationism and this church bringing in scientists, and I put that in air quotes, to talk about why carbon dating's stupid and the flood actually happened and the earth's only 6,000 years old, and don't listen to evolutionists. They're Satan trying to lie to you.
All that good stuff. Yeah.
Yep. So I've been deconstructing that quite a bit over the past couple of years. And so kind of in a limbo right now. Don't really know where to put myself, I guess. I'm still trying to figure that out.
And maybe you'll never really know where you feel aligned or where you position yourself. And I feel like with spirituality and faith, it's an ever-changing thing. You could have one small experience that changes everything you thought you just learned or relearn, I guess. So it's one of those things that never settles and stays. I don't think. For most people, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, or maybe some people will listen and say, I know exactly what my beliefs are and they've never changed, and I don't think they ever will. So to be that sure of something, I imagine is a pretty great thing, really.
That's where I guess that's where the word faith comes in. And when you say that you're that certain about something, I think that's where some of my trauma, my religious trauma growing up in this, and then also coming out of this other group, the certainty in my beliefs. While I was a part of this last church, I was certain anything you can ask can be answered with scripture. I was certain of it. I could find it. I could find the answer. It was in there. And, I realize how stupid that is because being so certain, that's a problem. Like, we really don't know a lot of this stuff. And so, as a kid growing up German Baptist, I remember this idea of a vengeful, angry God a little bit, where I didn't know if I was saved enough, right? So I would pray incessantly every night to forgive all the sins. I'd name them out. And, the next night I was like, well, what did I forget? I'm sure I forgot something. I'm going to hell if I don't get this prayer in. So I would and there was one sin I felt like was so bad. I prayed every night and I was like, that wasn't good enough. The next night I'd pray for it again. It wasn't good enough. And just so afraid of hell and, not being saved because I just wasn't right, and if you had some unconfessed, unrepented of sin, you died in that, you would go to hell, a literal eternal torment, because it wasn't maybe a hard line doctrine of German Baptist, but it's kind of the unspoken, like German Baptists are the only ones who have it right. The other progressive churches in town do not, and they're going to hell.
And that's terrifying imagery to share with, you said you were 12 years old. That must be terrifying to lay in bed and think that all of these awful things are going to happen to you because you're not doing things the way that they should be done.
Yeah. Oh, it is. I think that's definitely where a lot of religious trauma centers around for me, is this idea of just the slightest slip of the tongue is going to send you to an eternal torment, very much like sinners in the hands of an angry God type message. And also rapture. So the German Baptists do believe in, the future second coming of Christ and the rapture, and, believers will go, unbelievers will stay. There's, the end judgment. So I also had a fear that since I wasn't right with God, or I was only right if I prayed, the rapture would happen and I would be left. And so there were a couple times I remember distinctly thinking, I can't find my family. I can't find people. All these lights are off. The rapture happened and I was left. And the dread that came over me, it's like I forgot to pray forgiveness for these sins that I missed, and I got left. As a young kid. I mean,
that's really sad, isn't it? That's really sad to think about. If you had those experiences in a somewhat liberal evangelical household, as you talked about, your father wasn't too hung up on the black cat and the radio in the car and things like that. For children growing up in the more conservative households that might have this imagery put to them a bit more regularly or forcefully, that maybe there's a lot of young children out there and young adults out there who are having these worries and fears and living in kind of a state of just turmoil, really, and stress, I imagine. And not just with this group particularly, but with others that use that kind of fire and brimstone imagery as well.
Yeah, a lot of groups do that. I mean, it's a scare tactic to keep you in line. One of the first things I deconstructed was the idea of hell. And, that was like, wow, this would have helped when, if my parents had deconstructed the idea of hell and raised me that way, and I'm going to raise my kids without this fear of hell. And my parents bought me a book called 23 Minutes in Hell. A guy wrote a story about how God sent him to hell for 23 minutes and he was tortured by demons and all this stuff. And then God pulled him out of there and said, okay, this was for you to go preach and tell people. And my parents bought me this book. It was kind of when I was in a rebellious stage in my teenage years. And I think they bought it to scare the hell out of me, pun intended. But, that was traumatizing as well, because I believed every word of it. I'm like I'm going to get tortured by demons for eternity if I don't get it right. And that's no way that's not a choice. You're not making a choice if you go get baptized into some church because you want to get out of hell. You're just trying to get your free ticket out of hell.
It's so it's so unfortunate, some of the things that come through on this podcast in terms of that religious trauma that's inflicted to people at such a young age. But you talked about how you deconstructed hell as one of the first things that you did when you moved away from either group. So is that kind of part and parcel of advice that you would give for others who are looking to leave? Would you say kind of the deconstructing of certain things were important in your initial journey out of the evangelical groups that you've been a part of, and what advice would you give on top of that?
So the advice for like the German Baptist or the very, very high demand religion, that to me was, I don't care if what they believe is true. I just hate it. I'm out. And I don't want to be part of that. That was part of my rebellion against this. You have to behave and perform a certain way and all that. Everyone's leaving experience is different. And I don't want to speak for other high demand religions, because I know a Jehovah's Witness has a lot more on the line when they leave than a German Baptist does. German Baptist is just, you lose some of your community. Jehovah's Witness, you lose your family, like straight up. They don't talk to you at all. And that's not how German Baptists are. So they're probably a little less high demand in that regard. But, if you're wanting to leave, just realize, God's not scared of you asking questions or you trying to seek him in your own way. And nobody else can tell you what your experience has to be with spirituality or with God. And so, that's kind of on you. And don't judge others for wanting to pursue a different path. I think that's a big thing for current German Baptists, is if somebody chooses to leave, there's a lot of judgment towards why. Do you want to sin? Do you want to just go off and do this thing? So don't cast judgment on members who do want to leave. As far as like deconstructing hell, that one came as I was leaving the most recent evangelical church. And I think that came because for some reason I just had this thought about, is it logical that if you're born in Pakistan into a Muslim family and the only chance you ever have to hear about Jesus Christ is like some passing comment somebody makes, and that was your chance, and then you die and go to hell and you missed your chance? Like, man, it's real lucky that I was born in America in the right denomination out of 35,000. And I've got my ticket to heaven. We got it right, finally.
This is something I've talked about a lot, like on the show. And I always say, like, what if I've spoken to somebody that is from the true group or the right group, and they've all been told that they are the chosen ones and they are on the correct path, but not everyone can be. So what if there is one group, and what if I've spoken to somebody that is? So it's another one of those things that's like hard to get your kind of head around when you think about them. But yeah, it's you've just summed it up perfectly there when you've said it like that. Yeah,
it's Pascal's wager, right? Like if God is true, then you're better off believing in him than not. You can look up Pascal's wager. It's not a great argument for it, but I think it's some of the thoughts people have for belief in God. I know that when you're in the group, it's really hard to look outside and go, hey, let's be critical about my beliefs and, my community and all this stuff. That hurts. You don't want to do that. It's not an easy process. But if you're open to being like, hey, I might be wrong. At that point, you have to shut your brain down. You have to just try and stop that. You got to straight up go into like, I don't even know there's probably a psychological term for it. I know there's cognitive dissonance when you're in, but you don't believe that way. Cognitive dissonance is when you're open to believing a different way, you just can't leave, and it sucks. When you open yourself to saying, hey, I might be wrong, that's when you can deconstruct these ideas of hell or being a part of a high demand religion. And, for me, it took that logical, like, well, it's not fair. Like, if I believe in God and he's all good and all this and all that, then it's really not fair for somebody to be born as a Muslim, have one tiny little chance, and then go to hell for eternity and be tormented. So I was like, well, what do I really believe about it? And I picked up a book by Bart Ehrman called Heaven and Hell. He's a New Testament scholar, used to be a Christian until he studied the Bible in the original Greek. And And he just kind of goes through what people actually believed about it. And, when you base your theology on the 1600s version of King James translation, and it's got problems, you're going to believe things that are not true about hell, or about, maybe women being preachers in church, or certain things. They're just not something you need to base everything on. And that's kind of what it was for me. It's like, okay, well, if we're mistranslating this or we're misunderstanding it, what else is there? And then evolution and, other things come in, and little pieces of the puzzle start getting filled together. Now, for a lot of people, that's too much at once. And, so I don't know if it's kind of a chicken before the egg thing, where it's like, okay, in a high demand religion, like Christian style high demand religions, the Bible is literal, it is infallible, and it is perfect. Evangelicals believe that, and typically so do high demand religions. Mormons believe it, as along with some other books, but if you're outside of some of the other Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, it's the Bible and the Bible only. Sola Scriptura, I think, is the term. And so you cannot question the slightest cross of the T or dot of the I. And once you do, other things start to open up. So for me, it was this idea of hell. Well, if we're wrong about the idea of hell, that opens up the idea that Scripture is not perfect, not infallible, right? And then you can start doing other things. Now, for some people, it's like, okay, you start with Scripture is not infallible. Now, what do I believe about hell and creation and Paul's writings? Other people need to start with a specific topic. Okay, evolution is true. I'm a scientist and I believe it. Now, how does that affect what I believe about the Bible? It's perfectness. So a chicken before the egg. And, I don't want to tell anyone how to do it or what their one thing is. Mine was hell. And that kind of got the ball rolling. Others, it might be, a woman wants to be a lead pastor. She's got this personality where she wants to teach and help others, and she's not allowed to in the German Baptist or in evangelical churches, or most evangelical churches don't allow that. And so for her, that might be the one item that causes her to rethink how literally we take Paul's writings. I've got a lot more thoughts about all of that. It's not related to German Baptists specifically, but, I don't think German Baptists have the opportunity to even dig into it and question those things. You don't read anything outside of the King James version and maybe a few other, writings. But for the most part, like, the Holy Spirit helps you interpret Scripture, and so does church tradition. And you're like, if you go read some Bible scholar like Bart Ehrman, who is a textual critic and says, hey, that's not what Jesus actually said when this was written down here. Okay. A German Baptist would look at somebody like Bart Ehrman and say, okay, well, this is a demonic attack on our Christian faith. The German Baptist, this is one thing I forgot to mention, they don't believe in higher education for the most part. And so, you can go to school to become a nurse. There are some with college degrees, but the idea of going to a theological seminary or being trained in theology is completely like that. It's not only not encouraged, I don't think it would be allowed. Maybe a little bit, maybe the new conference will allow it a little more, but preachers are elected by the congregation based on their character in the community. And some prayer, I'm sure, and all that stuff. So, somebody may not even necessarily want to be a preacher or an elder, but the community says, hey, you're a respectful person. You're a man of one wife. You are not an alcoholic. All the things in 1 Timothy that line out what a elder should be.
You grow a fantastic beard.
You grow a fantastic beard. Well, some of them, I know one guy who got voted in and he had to start growing a beard because of it. So what it does, though, is it keeps things simple, right? There is no, let's dig into what the actual Greek meant and what its translation is. It doesn't matter. What does the King James Version say specifically? And every word that is Sheol or Gehenna or Tartarus or Hades is translated as hell. So everything is hell. There is no study into that word. And there shouldn't be, because the Holy Spirit gave us the King James Version, and we're going to read it. It's pretty clear. It's right there. It's in English. And that basically is how they teach. And if you go to seminary, you start putting your own thoughts, or historian and scholars' thoughts into spiritual matters, and you should not do that. Then that leads to taking things literally like a holy kiss, where you really shouldn't. You're not even reading that in its cultural context, right? You're just taking it how you want to, and then it's like a big deal, and you can't not do it,
So like you said, there's no space to kind of take something that you're not sure about, mull it over, research it, pick it apart, and come to your own conclusion on what you think that means. And perhaps maybe people who are thinking about moving away from a group such as this one, that would be a good place to start. Take something that maybe doesn't sound like 100%, or something that doesn't sit right, or something that you think kind of it may be a bit over exaggerated, or doesn't seem like it could have happened. Like, can somebody really turn water into wine? And then things like witchcraft are seen as like not something that's allowed within a lot of these religious movements. And that's why, things like Harry Potter's not allowed to be read because it's witchcraft, but it's also secular material. So, take something that maybe doesn't sit right, maybe doesn't add up, and start to think it over, pick it apart, pull it apart, research it, something small. And once you're able to kind of go through that process with something smaller, maybe you can build on it until you are coming up with free thinking, independent thought around the religion itself, the experiences that you've had growing up. I think that's some really fantastic advice that you've just given there. And it's kind of not just, and I'm not saying that this isn't the right way, because for some people it probably most definitely is, but we don't just want to slap therapy, go to therapy, and that's the answer to everything, because I don't think it is. Sometimes it's the smaller steps and starting very small and working your way up. And maybe this is the type of advice that a therapist would give. And I know that therapy is a fantastic resource and a great tool for some people, but for those kind of just starting to think about moving out of their group and can't do something like attend therapy because it would raise questions within the family environment, the church environment, and things like that, maybe just kind of setting aside 5 or 10 minutes a day to have a thought or a feeling about something that can then grow is a really, really great place to start. So there is so much more we could talk about. I say this all the time, but we have literally just scratched the surface. And I didn't even know that there was a whole other movement that we could have talked about today. We wouldn't have been able to fit it in to still get all the good stuff that you've told us today. But
Correct.
I always feel like I'm leaving these interviews without like checking all the boxes. But we've covered so much, and it's been really insightful for me. And I really have learned a lot about a movement that I had no idea even existed until, you got in touch to come and chat with me on the podcast. So I just want to say that I really appreciate your time. I'm glad that you are happy with your wife and your children and your dog, and that you're in a position to be able to work through now at your own pace, where your beliefs lie, and have those processes in place for yourself to work through those things and go on that journey independently without the pressure of attending a religious group that you no longer kind of feel dedicated to. So thank you so much for your time today, Jordan. This has just been great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's nice to tell my story and kind of get it all out there and rethink about it. I mean, it's been a while since I had thought about my time in the group, so I appreciate you having me on. And I would be very interested in hearing, another Anabaptist member's experience in leaving if you end up finding one. Or
if anybody listening has experience in one of these groups and would like to come forward, then please do. I would love to chat with you to learn more, especially because, like we've said, like you've given us such a great introduction into the movement, but I feel like we have only just scratched the surface. And likewise, if anybody would be interested in hearing Jordan's story about being involved in a conservative evangelical movement that does include politics in America right now, then let me know, because I will get in touch with Jordan and ask him if he'd be interested in a follow-up episode. Fantastic.
I certainly would, and I would be interested in hearing somebody who is a part of in America, like the QAnon stuff. I know it's not a religious group, but it is kind of a weird cult-like belief of the vaccine is
it aligns, doesn't it, with a lot of the evangelical movement at the moment. They're kind of becoming sort of blurred, intertwined.
Yes, they really are. Yes.
Indistinguishable.
I would love to hear somebody's story about leaving that and what took them out of it, because I have family members in it and I want to know how to talk to them. So please, if you're listening and you have left it or know someone who's left it, I think it would be awesome to hear their story.
Definitely. Well. Yes.
And I want to leave one more thing. If anybody's still listening, there is a really interesting thing, if you want to look up, called the Munster Rebellion. It was radical Anabaptists back in the 1500s who seized a city and started just took it over. And then the German government or something had to come in and take them down and killed the leaders and put them up in these cages that you can still go to the city and see these cages hanging off the side of the building.
What?
Really way off the wall story about Anabaptists. There's a podcast by Dan Carlin on it that's super interesting, super off the wall. I just remembered it and thought I just would mention it if it piques anyone's interest.
Yes,
so Munster Rebellion, MUNSTR.
Very non-pacifist.
No.
And interesting. So anybody that's looking for any support or advice to read other people's stories or to put their own story forward, there's r/Evangelical subreddit that you can go to. I'll put a link in the episode description. And for anybody that has family or friends involved in the QAnon movement and looking for support or advice with that as well, there's the QAnon Casualties subreddit that you can go to for support. I'll put both of those in the episode description. And I think that's everything, Jordan. I think we've covered everything.
We've covered a lot.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Yeah. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thanks, Jordan. Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been The Cult Vault.